Just as in the Israel-Palestine situation, the media is cheerleading the war in Afghanistan. They're asking us to buy this war without providing us with much justification. The justification that they try to give us is all very vague. They justify it in terms of democracy and nation building, bridges, schools and hospitals, and even women's rights. War in our own country, in our own society, is being normalized. Patriotic symbols and sayings are all out there now, increasing every day. War and terrorism frame our lives. We are being asked by our government to give up more and more civil liberties, as in the recent throne speech, in order to fight crime and terror. And those two, in fact, are being increasingly identified with each other, a quite nightmarish development on its own. In this nightmare world, the military absorbs more and more government funding at the expense of our own nation building, of our own schools and our own hospitals. And as for the poor in our country, those people are basically being told to join the army. And those who come back from Afghanistan in boxes are not the well-off, but they're the poor, from the poorest parts of Canada, from here in the Maritimes, in Newfoundland, and in Quebec, and other parts of rural Canada. And if this isn't bad enough, then more wars are on the horizon. The ground is already being laid for possible wars in places like Pakistan and Iran, in Syria and Lebanon, and perhaps even again in Israel and Palestine. Closer to home, there's even mutterings about interventions in places like Venezuela and in Ecuador, where current more or less progressive governments have the audacity to threaten the domination of American and corporate global interests. The question that's before us is, how is it possible to stop this nightmare from continuing? How can we wake up from this nightmare? Well, there's really kind of only one answer to it, and the answer is that we have to bear witness everywhere against the lies that the media is feeding us. We have to do whatever we can, not just to passively oppose the war that's going on and future wars that may happen, and the preparation that we're being asked to participate in, but we have to actively resist that in whatever way possible. One way to do that is to provide something which I call critical support for those in the world who resist the United States, NATO, and the Canada military machine. Now, I grew up in the United States during the Vietnam War. The Vietnamese insurgents were demonized, as are the Taliban and Hamas and the Iranian government and Hezbollah today. At that time, during the war in Vietnam, the left all over the world gave critical support to the Vietnamese insurgents, even though many of the leftists and anarchists in the movement found much of the authoritarian practices of the Vietnamese insurgents fairly repulsive. But it was that critical support, at least as much as simple opposition to the war, to bringing the troops home, that helped them turn the tide against that war and to actually bring the troops home. It prevented the U.S. government from totally demonizing the enemy. In fact, as we provided critical support for the Vietnamese insurgents, we and others around us realized that we shared many of the ideals of our government's enemies. And it put some of the pressures on the Vietnamese insurgents themselves to be less authoritarian in their own practice. The point is that war cannot be effectively waged if the warriors are prevented from dehumanizing each other. This is why it's so important to call our government to task if it tortures or supports torturers. It gives the lie to those who would torture our allegedly inhuman enemies. So we have to resist the war machine, and we have to denounce our government and the corporations and the media when they do dehumanize the Taliban or Hamas or others who are currently on the enemy list. We have to tell the world that as long as anyone resists the onslaught of global capital, we will critically support them. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack, for your perspective. I want to remind if anyone else wants to speak, we do have a speakers list, and you're more than welcome to. Next up, we have Jeff Brown, who's been a long-time peace activist.
Hi, everybody. Here. Once again, it's kind of sad that we keep having to come together on these occasions, and it always seems to be raining. A little depressing, but there is cause for hope, I believe, and I want to talk for a minute about the situation that we find ourselves in and hopefully look toward a way that we might find ourselves a way out at some point. It's been over 6 years since the Bush-Cheney regime launched the so-called War on Terror with the invasion of Afghanistan. And all over the world today, people are marching, they're speaking out, they're raising their fists against this war. We're told by the powers that be in Washington and in Ottawa that there's progress in the war on terror, that we are winning, we're told. We're told that we're in for a long, hard fight, that the war is likely to continue for years to come, but progress is being made. The problem, you see, is that they, the evildoers, are not like us. They're ruthless and cunning. They're cowards and fanatics. They have no regard for human life. They hate our freedoms, and they will stop at nothing to destroy them. Fighting them there in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and soon in Iran, fighting them in their dens and hives and caves, and that's the kind of language we hear, isn't it? Because these people aren't humans like we are, means that we don't have to fight them here, in our homes, on our streets, in our neighborhoods, in our shopping malls. So we're told the stakes couldn't be higher. Not only are our lives and the lives of our families and friends and neighbors in jeopardy, not only do they hang in the balance, but our very way of life, our liberty and our democracy is under attack. So this is the rhetoric that we hear. Let's assess the progress and the consequences of the war on terror so far. Well, the consequences have been diametrically opposed to the purposes by which the powers that be assert that we're embarking on this war in the first place. Rather than spread and foster liberty and democracy, the Bush and Cheney regime have proved to be its greatest enemy. They have violated the U.S. Constitution, they've violated American law, international law, and the Geneva Conventions with impunity. These people have spied on Americans without warrant. They have denied habeas corpus. They've denied attorney-client privilege. They've denied due process. They've violated the Geneva Convention's protections of those Americans and foreigners who are captured. The Bush-Cheney regime has designated these people without evidence, or with secret evidence, to be terrorists, and these people have no way to answer against those charges. This is a regime that is engaged in kidnapping and torture. It's a regime that has engaged in military aggression against sovereign states. It has legitimated this aggressions with intentional deception and the fabrication of evidence. Bush and Cheney have assaulted the separation of powers in the United States. The imperial presidency that we've heard about for many, many years as a threat has become a reality in the United States. Through signing statements, through executive orders, the presidency in the U.S. has placed itself above the law. Not even the president of Iran claims this power. There is massive military profiteering and corruption. There are no-bid military contracts exchanged for kickbacks to political campaigns. And we have war, apparently without end. Probably 1 million Iraqis have died as a result of the Bush-Cheney invasion. Several millions more have been made homeless. Tens of thousands of civilian